Today we are taking an updated look at the Radeon RX 5700 XT to see how one of the best value GPUs of 2019 is getting on 5 years later. This thing was released at $400 US and it competed directly with the RTX 2060 Super. And a year ago I did compare the two across a wide range of games, and in short the 5700 XT was 13% faster on average, so a fairly comfortable win there. Now for this update, I want to ignore the usual direct comparison with a product such as the RTX 2060 Super, and instead compare the 5700 XT with a range of current and previous generation GPUs, while also taking a look at some in-game footage of some of the newer titles. So there's a lot to go over, but before we get into it,
today's video is sponsored by MSI. Thinking of upgrading your monitor? Now is the perfect time, thanks to MSI's stunning new QD OLED gaming monitors. With 4K 240Hz and 1440p 360Hz options, there's something for everyone, whether that's fast-paced competitive gaming on the elite speed of OLED, brilliant HDR gaming on these bright, immersive, well-calibrated displays, or even creator work backed by a 3-year OLED warranty. There's tons of connectivity too, including KVM support. I've been very impressed with the performance of these MSI QD OLEDs, and I strongly recommend them as flagship gaming monitors that will satisfy your needs for years to come. Find out more on MSI's new range of QD OLED gaming monitors via the links in the description.
Okay, so the point of this content is to explore how usable the 5700 XT is in the latest and greatest games, for those of you perhaps considering one on the second-hand market, and then for those of you who already own one, a look at the upgrade options. So in a way, this content will be split into two sections, and we'll start with the more traditional benchmark graphs to see how the 5700 XT stacks up against a range of newer but similar priced GPUs. I'll focus on the 1080p results, but I've also tested at 1440p, and we can go over the average data towards the end of the video. For testing, we're using our Ryzen 7 7800X 3D test system with 32GB of DDR5 6000 CL30 memory. So let's get into it. Starting with Resident Evil 4, we see that the 5700 XT is good for 94 FPS using fairly high quality settings at 1080p, which is the same level of performance you can now get from the ARC A770, and just 6% slower than the 7600 XT and 6650 XT. When compared to the RTX 2070, which, for reference moving forward, is essentially an RTX 2060 Super, the 5700 XT was 24% faster. Moving on to A Plague Tale Requiem, we see that at 1080p, using the ultra quality preset, the 5700 XT was able to render 64 FPS on average in our test, which again places it on par with the ARC A770, along with the RX 6600 and RTX 3060, while only being a few frames slower than the RTX 4060. For similar money, the 7700 XT is offering almost 60% more performance in this example, so that's quite a substantial upgrade at the $400 price point. Next we have Cyberpunk 2077, and this time we're looking at 66 FPS on average, which is comparable performance to that of the RTX 3060 and ARC A750, making the 5700 XT around 14% slower than the RX 7600, A770 and RTX 4060. Then for those of you looking to upgrade, the 7700 XT is 64% faster. Testing with Dying Light 2 saw an average frame rate of 73 FPS, which isn't bad, even if we are only at 1080p. That said, this is RX 6600 like performance, so quite a bit slower than the likes of the A770, 7600 XT and RTX 4060 for example. Those in need of more frames can upgrade to the 7700 XT for a whopping 86% performance boost. Not bad really, not bad at all. Forza Horizon 5 played really well with the 5700 XT. Here we have the game maxed out at 1080p, and we're still enjoying 79 FPS. So pretty good there, though for your information it did drop to 63 FPS at 1440p. In this example it was comparable to the A750 and even the RTX 2070, making parts like the A770 and 6650 XT around 23% faster. We also have another example where the 7700 XT is much faster, boosting performance by almost 70%. Performance in Total War Warhammer 3 is also respectable, roughly matching the A750, RTX 3060 and 6650 XT with 76 FPS on average, making it just 12% slower than the RX 7600 and RTX 4060. Then, as we've come to expect, the 7700 XT is much faster, boosting performance in this example by 71%. Next up is Spider-Man Remastered, and being that this is a well-optimized title, I'm not surprised to find the 5700 XT delivering 126 FPS on average at 1080p, using the highest possible quality settings, and even at 1440p, we're still looking at 92 FPS. And this meant that the 5700 XT was comparable to the 7600 XT, 7600, 6650 XT, and the RTX 3060. Oh, and it was just a few frames slower than the A770. So in this example, the 7700 XT was just 35% faster, and that margin only grew to 39% at 1440p. So a great title here for the old AMD GPU. The 5700 XT was able to deliver over 60 FPS in Halo Infinite at 1080p using the maximum in-game quality preset with 71 FPS on average, which made it only slightly slower than the RTX 2070, 6650 XT, and RTX 3060. Then for a 46% performance boost, you could upgrade to the 7700 XT. Playing The Last of Us Part 1 is a bit of a struggle with the 5700 XT, and while 51 FPS is certainly playable, we are only at 1080p, though there is certainly more room to dial down the quality settings. In any case, it wasn't much slower than the 6650 XT, RTX 4060, RTX 3060, and RX 7600. Then for those seeking an upgrade, the 7700 XT was a staggering 82% faster in this example. Hitman 3 is not exactly a new title, and that explains why the 5700 XT does so well here, with 116 FPS on average. But even when compared to current generation products such as the RTX 4060, the performance is still impressive. But even so, you're still able to receive an almost 60% performance boost with the 7700 XT. Lastly, we have Watch Dogs Legion, and here the 5700 XT was good for 100 FPS on average, making it slightly faster than the RX 6600, RTX 3060, and A770. That also meant that the 7700 XT was 73% faster, rendering 173 FPS on average. Okay, so here's the 12-game average, and as expected, the 5700 XT is on par with the RTX 3060, making it a mere 2% slower than the A770, 6% slower than the 6650 XT, and 9% slower than the RX 7600. That means it's roughly equivalent to a modern $270 US GPU, so not bad at all. So if you happen to still own a 5700 XT and you're in the market for a new GPU, and are looking to spend what you did previously, so $400 US, the 7700 XT is offering an almost 60% performance uplift, while the more expensive RTX 4070 was 81% faster. Now, for those of you interested in 1440p data, here's the 12-game average. The 5700 XT rendered 57 FPS on average, which placed it alongside the A750, RTX 3060, and 6650 XT. So in this example, the 7700 XT was 61% faster on average. In terms of power efficiency, the 5700 XT is on par with the A750, so by modern standards, it's not very good, and clearly illustrating that fact is the 7700 XT, which consumed the same amount of power for 56% better performance. Then we have Spider-Man, where the 5700 XT again matched the power consumption of the 7700 XT, which isn't ideal given that it was 26% slower in this example. Okay, so let's take a look at some gameplay footage, mostly in modern titles, starting with Alan Wake 2 using the low quality preset at 1080p. In this section of the game, we were seeing between 30 to 40 FPS, which admittedly isn't great, and frame stuttering was an issue, so overall, I guess it is playable, but very poor. Enabling FSR quality mode though did help a lot with the frame stutters, and now we're seeing around 60 FPS, so overall a much better experience, and certainly one that's quite enjoyable. Next we have Assassin's Creed Mirage, but this time we're able to play at 1440p using the high quality preset, and what you're looking at here is native performance. And that's pretty impressive given we're looking at around 70 FPS on average, so for a 5-year-old mid-range GPU, that's a great result. Then if we enable FSR quality and reset the game, the frame rate jumps up to 90 FPS and at times hits 100 FPS, which is remarkably good performance at 1440p using high quality settings for a $400 GPU that was released 5 years ago. Frame time performance was also very good, though we are getting close to maxing out the 8GB VRAM buffer, so I wouldn't be shocked if that becomes a problem at certain stages of the game, or after extensive gameplay. Playing Fortnite while using the DirectX 12 mode and the medium quality preset settings at 1440p allowed the 5700 XT to render on average around 180 FPS. But for capturing this footage, I had to play at 60Hz, and bloody hell, at 60Hz it is extremely difficult. So normally I don't suck this much. Building was much more difficult, editing was very difficult, and flick shots were nearly impossible. I suppose if I spent a few hours playing this way, which would be sort of a form of torture, but if I did, I'm sure I could get used to it and get a bit better. But this isn't a knock on those of you who have to play at 60Hz. I'm merely commenting that for those who are used to 144Hz or more, going back down to 60Hz is tough. Ideally, I'd want well over 200 FPS on a 144Hz or faster display, so using the low quality preset, which drops the render scale to 50%, the frame rate jumps back up around 500 FPS. So I think a 75% render scale should work well. God of War was released on PC roughly 2 years ago now, so it's not exactly new, but it does look great, and at 1440p maxed out works a treat on the 5700 XT at over 60 FPS. Although we are getting very close to maxing out the VRAM buffer, the frame time performance was excellent, and while I do love my high refresh rate gaming, I have to say the experience here was quite good. Now, I've not played much Helldivers 2, so I don't expect the greatest gameplay here. Plus, with the benchmark overlay, I couldn't really tell what I was doing, and I think I'll stick with that excuse. But anyway, at 1440p, using the medium quality preset at the native resolution, we're looking at just shy of 60 FPS, which was okay, I guess. Then with FSR quality mode enabled, the frame rate jumped up to around 80 FPS, which was much better, and the game still appeared to look quite good. For testing Horizon Forbidden West, I stuck with 1440p, and with the very high preset enabled, we were looking at frame rates in the mid-40s for the most part, so playable, but certainly less than ideal. Therefore, I enabled the quality FSR mode, and this got us up over 60 FPS, which was much smoother and a more enjoyable experience. So it is possible to play Horizon Forbidden West with the high quality settings at 1440p, providing you enable upscaling. So not really 1440p, but I guess that's the state of gaming these days. Finally, downgrading the preset to medium with FSR still enabled boosted frame rates comfortably above 80 FPS. And visually I have to say the game still looked very good, so this is how I'd opt to play with a 5700 XT. I'm not really sure how you play Immortals of Aveum, it's not exactly my thing, but it looks fancy enough. Anyway, using the low settings at 1080p, we're looking at around 50 FPS, and we're also very close to maxing out the VRAM buffer, which might have explained the odd frame time issue. Out of interest, I did enable FSR quality upscaling with frame generation to see if that helped the 5700 XT, and it seemed okay. Frame rates were reported to be north of 130 FPS, but it felt more like 60 FPS, and I could notice some artifacting. I guess if you were desperate to play this game and all you had was a 5700 XT, then this works well enough. Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart ran surprisingly well at 1440p using the medium preset, and frame rate sat pretty consistently above 60 FPS. Again, we were pretty close to the limits of the 8GB VRAM buffer, but even so, frame time performance was good. But if we switch to the high preset, you'll notice performance doesn't change much, but that's in part because the game isn't being fully rendered, with many of the textures now missing. Therefore, I went back to the medium preset and enabled FSR quality upscaling, and this boosted frame rates to around 80 to 90 FPS, and now the experience was excellent. Star Wars Jedi Survivor played at just 30 to 40 FPS when using the medium preset at 1440p, so a less than ideal experience. Enabling FSR quality upscaling boosted performance to around 60 to 70 FPS, which was a far better experience, and overall the game looked very good. For those of you wanting to play some esports titles, especially with competitive quality settings, you'll find that the 5700 XT is still more than sufficient. As we saw when playing Counter-Strike 2 when using the medium quality preset at 1440p, frame rates were well in excess of 200 FPS, which will be enough for most gamers. Finally, we have Avatar, and at 1440p using the medium preset, frame rates hovered around 50 FPS. Oddly though, enabling FSR quality upscaling doesn't appear to work, or at least it didn't improve performance with the 5700 XT. So in order to boost performance, I dropped the resolution to 1080p, and this was enough to get frame rates up over 60 FPS. As predicted all those years ago, the Radeon 5700 XT is still tracking along really well, and I think it's fair to say at this point it has gone the distance. Sure, it doesn't support stuff like ray tracing, and opinions are going to vary there, but I do think it's safe to say that in 2024, the state of ray tracing on a product such as the RTX 2070/2060 Super is poor, and it's not worth using in the vast majority of games. So arguing that the 5700 XT misses out on RT support is seriously clutching at straws. In my opinion, the 10% plus better rasterization performance that you generally get when compared to the RTX 2070/2060 Super has proven far more valuable. But what the 5700 XT has missed out on for a good portion of its life is upscaling. And while FSR is decent today, it's still generally inferior to DLSS, especially at lower resolutions, like what you'd be using with a 5700 XT-like product. On that note though, it was great to see FSR working quite well on Alan Wake 2, getting the 5700 XT up around 60 FPS at 1080p, which is impressive in the sense that prior to a recent update, you'd be looking at more like 30 to 40 FPS under those conditions. And a lot was made about Alan Wake 2 and its use of mesh shaders and how that would affect the 5700 XT. And while initial results certainly weren't great, it is at least usable to a reasonable degree now. But we are nearing the end of the road for the 5700 XT, and really the same is also true for the 2060 Super and RTX 2070. Of course, there's still loads of games you can enjoy with these GPUs, and there will be more to come, but games like Alan Wake 2 do mark the beginning of the end. Now, if you have held on to your 5700 XT, somehow you just didn't sell it for an absolute mint during the cryptocurrency mining boom, and you're now sensing that the end is near, the good news is for around $400 US, you can receive a pretty significant performance upgrade with a part such as the 7700 XT, which is now down at $400 US. So although it's been a while, such is the pace of GPU progress over the past half decade. On average though, you're looking at around a 60% uplift, which for most will justify the upgrade. And you're also getting some extra VRAM though. I still find 12GB a bit disappointing at this price point in 2024. But for 16GB, you would need to spend $500 on a 7800 XT or $450 on a 4060 Ti, though the GeForce GPU was only a little over 40% faster than the 5700 XT. Anyway, let me know what you think about these results, and if you still have a 5700 XT, are you considering upgrading it? And if so, what are you thinking of getting? If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, subscribe for more content. I have a few more sort of legendary status type GPUs that I want to revisit. GTX 1080 Ti is an obvious one. But yeah, some great GPUs that we'll be looking at over the next few weeks, so make sure you are subscribed for that. Also, we have Floatplane and Patreon, so if you want to get more Harbour Unboxed goodness and extra graphs like all the 1440p gaming graphs for this review will be accessible to the Patreon and Floatplane members. So links in the video description. You'll get access to our exclusive Discord server, monthly live streams, Q&As, and behind the scenes content. So check that out if you're interested. But if not, I guess that's fine. Don't bother looking at it. We have it there for no reason, apparently. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.